In today's lesson on ministerial development, I would like to talk about the minister's ethics. To get started, let's read the words of Jesus in Matthew 7:12, New King James. Therefore, whatever you want men to do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. Ministerial ethics is simply treating people properly. Let's talk about some important aspects of ministerial ethics. We consider our relationships with everyone around us. First of all, our relationship to the community. We should be good citizens of our community. Even though we understand the world around us does not serve God and by and large does not promote Christian values, we are to be good citizens of our country and our community, and we are to serve our community. Our church should be known in our community as helping people in need. We're not simply preaching spiritual salvation for heaven, but we need to find ways to help the poor and needy in our community, to be good citizens, to reflect the diversity of our community, to champion the cause of righteousness and justice and holiness, not in a hateful, abrasive way, but in a kind and courteous way, to reflect the message and the Spirit of Christ in everything we do. To have a good reputation, to have a reputation for paying our bills, for cooperating, for participating, being involved in trying to better our community. That would be a whole lesson in itself, but we need to think of ministerial ethics in terms of good relationships with our neighbors, our community, and our society. Second relationship I want to talk about is the relationship to the senior pastor. If you are not the senior pastor, you need to have a good relationship with your senior pastor. That means you recognize him as the leader of the church. You recognize him as the spiritual authority in your life and in your ministry. And so you never do anything to undermine the senior pastor. You never speak against him. You never conspire against him. If people come to you with complaints, you never side with them against the senior pastor. But if it's something that you can explain and resolve in such a way that supports him, that you do that. Or perhaps you will simply have to say you need to talk to him. If you yourself don't understand the situation or you have your own questions about it, then at least you can kindly and courteously say that's something you need to talk to the senior pastor about. And then, of course, you will let the senior pastor know of situations that need his attention. If someone asks you to counsel but not to tell the senior pastor, you should not make that kind of commitment. That puts you in an awkward position where you can't win. So if someone comes to you with confidential information, you have to reserve the right that as needed, you will bring the senior pastor in the loop. If they refuse to give that kind of assurance, then you're going to have to direct them to the senior pastor. If they feel that there's a major problem, you're going to have to refer them to get appropriate help elsewhere. And maybe there are situations where they need a professional counselor, or maybe they need the involvement of the district. But in no case can you get yourself stuck where you are disloyal or betraying the senior pastor. In rare cases, when there is indeed an issue involving the senior pastor, you should go to him directly, or as provided in our manual and judicial procedure, there will be situations where you may need to report to other authorities, such as district officials. But always should be done ethically and in accordance with procedure. And the overriding emphasis, if you are working under a senior pastor, then you need to support his ministry. You need to help him. You need to be an extension of his ministry. You need to work in harmony with him. And ultimately, if you cannot do that, you would have to go to a place where you can. But of course, before that alternative comes into being, you should make every effort to be reconciled and work in harmony and be supportive of the senior pastor. Third, relationship to believers. Even though if you are the senior pastor, you have authority in the local church, or all ministers have a certain amount of spiritual authority at working under the senior pastor. Still, we must have respect for every believer. We are not the chief shepherd. The Lord is the chief shepherd. We are the under shepherd. I'll have more to say about this in future lessons, but we owe love to everyone. We owe respect to everyone. There is no reason why we would ever physically or emotionally or verbally abuse another person, especially another believer. But always we treat them with courtesy, kindness, and respect. We never try to manipulate them. We never demean them. We never humiliate them. There may be times of discipline. There may be times of correction, but always in love and always considering the golden rule, which I read at the outset, that we treat people how we would want to be treated, and we treat them how the Word of God tells us to treat them. Next relationship to evangelist. And now here I'm speaking from the pastor's point of view. When an evangelist comes, we treat that evangelist with all courtesy and respect. We need to give them a good offering. If we can't afford to give them a good offering, we shouldn't invite them. We should plan ahead. We should raise money if necessary. Think of it this way. If an evangelist comes for a week, then what would 1 week's worth of wages be, and include expenses and benefits in that? Even if the evangelist is only coming for several nights, does that essentially require him to block off a week? Or in essence, he cannot, if we take the choice times, such as weekend, then he can't really do anything productive to earn income during the rest of the week, or he'd be very limited in doing so. Then we need to think of what would be fair under the circumstances. Now, when an evangelist comes, we need to be careful, and this works both ways. We shouldn't gossip against other ministers or against the organization or against other churches, but there should be courtesy and respect in our speech. And if you're the evangelist, then you come to support the pastor. You don't come to preach contrary to what the pastor preaches. You don't come to undermine the pastor. You don't accept offerings from the people of the church, but you refer those offerings to the pastor. In any case where something confidential is told you, something's given to you, at the minimum, you should bring the senior pastor in the loop and let him decide how to handle that. But you never try to build something against the senior pastor or do something in the local congregation or with the saints that the senior pastor doesn't know about. The pastor and the evangelist must work in harmony with respect for one another for the benefit of the congregation as a whole. Now let's talk more generally about our relationship to other ministers, other pastors, and other churches. Simply, there should be professional courtesy. Just as when you go to a lawyer or a doctor and you have some concern and you go to a different one, typically they will not attack the previous professional that you went to, but then they will try to start fresh and deal with you in a professional way. So also, we should not attack other preachers or other churches. We should not attack them from the pulpit. We should not attack them personally. Even people of other denominations or people who have left us, there are times, especially in private conversation, where you can express you disagree with their doctrine, or you disagree with their ethics, or you disagree with their lifestyle, but should always be respectful and courteous. People are not our enemy. The devil is our enemy. We should not get lured into personal attacks, and especially from the pulpit. We should preach truth. We don't have to attack individuals or denominations or churches. The general rule is, and this is especially true within the apostolic ranks, if you cannot say something good about the person, then don't say anything at all. But don't tear someone else down. Don't use gossip or tale-bearing. And consider that even something that's true, if it's personal, private, of a scandalous nature, that becomes tale-bearing if it's told to people who don't have a need to know, who are not in authority to deal with a certain situation. So we don't discuss those types of things out of respect for the ministry and out of a desire to be godly in our own speech. Relationship to our predecessor and our successor. If you take a position such as the pastorate of a church, do not attack your predecessor. You need to build a relationship with people. That takes time. Be willing to invest that time. There's no need to criticize the actions of your predecessor, but in any way possible, give honor and respect. If there are circumstances where you cannot give complete honor, give honor where honor is due and leave the other alone. People can form their own opinions. If you are faithful, if you're dedicated, if you invest in people, if you earn their respect, they're very capable of making their own decisions and transferring their loyalties. But if you try to force it, then you're only going to hurt yourself and you're going to alienate a certain percentage of people. You force people to make a choice, and some people will not make the choice in favor of you. Likewise, when you have a successor, you've got to turn over the responsibility and then leave it alone. You cannot listen to people who will come to criticize. You must be supportive of your successor. You must defer to the decisions of your successor. You must cooperate. If there comes a situation where you don't feel that you can cooperate, then you must kindly extricate yourself from the situation. And again, if you can't speak well, then don't say anything at all or don't speak evil. If there's major unresolved problems, you have to refer people to talk to the person or talk to the church board or talk to the district officials if it's one of those rare cases that would require some type of external intervention. Otherwise, you simply need to be supportive as much as possible of their leadership and their role. I understand, and I've seen it as a local pastor, as a presbyter, as a district superintendent, even as a general superintendent. I've seen difficult situations on both sides. I've seen church conflicts. I've seen conflicts between ministers. And what we have to learn, there are some situations that may be unfair and may be unjust, but we don't have the authority to intervene, or we're not the right person to give the solution. Someone else is going to have to step up to the plate. Someone else is going to have to help people. We can't help everybody. We can't fix every situation. We have to do what we can within ethical guidelines. And beyond that, we have to turn it over to the other authorities who are involved in those situations. We can't fix all the problems of the church, but we are limited to what we can do ethically, what our position and our authority calls for, and then we have to work in harmony with other people. Now let's talk about our relationship to the district and general organization. We're part of a body, and it's important for us to understand there are biblical principles of unity, of accountability, of submission to authority. Just as we teach our people to follow these principles, so we as ministers must follow the same principles. My belonging to a particular organization is not essential for salvation or essential to ministry, but my following biblical principles of accountability and submission and cooperation and unity is vitally important. And so if I am a part of an organization, I need to cooperate. I need to be respectful. I cannot simply withdraw at a whim, but I must have very good biblical grounds for whatever my action or lack of action is with regard to the body that I am a part of. That means as much as possible, we need to be involved in our sectional, district, and general functions. We need to participate. We need to cooperate. We need to be loyal. We need to be supportive. We shouldn't undermine. We shouldn't use gossip and tale-bearing and other unethical methods to try to get our way. We shouldn't vie for political position, but we should work together to advance the kingdom of God. Now, let's be very practical and specific. Let's talk about some difficult areas of ministerial ethics. Let's suppose someone is wanting to transfer from one church to another church. What do you do? when members of another apostolic church start attending your church, or they indicate a desire to transfer to your church. And by the way, I don't limit this strictly to the United Pentecostal Church International, but any apostolic minister that's preaching the same basic truth, I feel we have the same basic ethical obligation. Now, someone coming from a non-Christian background or a Christian background that doesn't teach the new birth experience according to Acts 2:38, then I believe that they're coming into greater truth. And while I will always be kind and respectful toward the place they're coming from, I will not feel the same ethical constraints, because I will feel they're moving forward in the plan of salvation, and therefore I must do everything to facilitate that. However, if someone is coming from a church which does preach the message of salvation, that they are and can be saved in that environment, if they're going to come to me, there's some important ethical guidelines that we must follow. Here's what I recommend and what I have done. And I've had to face situations, difficult decisions, in which I counseled my presbyter at the time, my district superintendent at the time, my assistant general superintendent at the time. And I developed some guidelines that I found to work under every situation. If there is such a transfer or potential transfer, the first thing I did, I advised them to talk to their pastor, and I explained that I did not solicit members from other apostolic churches, but our goal was to grow by evangelism. And of course, I communicated this to our members in spirit as well as letter. You know, sometimes it's possible to say that in words, but by your actions, your gestures, by allowing your people to do certain things, you can create an environment where it's obvious, you know, we've got the best church in the world, we're having revival, we're growing, we want you to come visit, we want you to come see what's happening. And even though you're not directly soliciting, you're creating an atmosphere either by your own actions or by the actions of your saints that you're enticing people to come. That's not right, that's not ethical. And of course, doing such bold things as hospital visitation or home visitation or calls or other things to deliberately solicit people from one church to leave their church, come to your church, that's simply unethical. So I'm going to assume that everybody understands that's unethical. That's beyond the pale. But suppose you are acting ethically, you're teaching your church to act ethically, and you're doing that both in letter and spirit, but still someone would transfer. In that case, advise them you really need to talk to your pastor. I'm not qualified to counsel you or to advise you, but if you're considering a church change, you really need to talk to your own pastor first. We're not interested in trying to solicit anyone. Step 2, you communicate with their pastor, because they may or may not approach him. And with email and phone and text, it's exceedingly easy just to send a simple message or make a simple contact to say a certain family visited us, indicated an interest in changing, or indicated they were thinking about leaving. I advised them to go talk to you, and I'm telling you so that you can follow up just in case they haven't talked to you. Now, what if he says fine, or perhaps it's for someone from another city and they're moving, and it's obviously understood that they need to find another church? It's still important to communicate with that pastor just to get a reference. Otherwise, you could get yourself in trouble if someone perhaps has been guilty of child molestation, or has gone through a divorce situation, or has done some other things that are immoral or unethical or sinful. You need to know the background. Even if they're good people, you need to know perhaps some things that would be helpful in ministering to them. Now, step 3, what if the pastor expresses some concern or disapproval? Well, in the final analysis, we cannot force people to stay at a church or force people to make certain choices. I don't think we should use the club of spiritual authority or threats of rebellion or damnation to try to force people to do something. It doesn't mean we entice them or encourage them. We follow standard guidelines. But what if, despite what we've said, a person persists in coming? In that case, generally, you would not encourage them, but you would not forbid them. You would not offer them involvement in the near future. You would not try to reward them for making a decision contrary to your pastor. But you would just put it on hold, so to speak, and you would just start from that point to wait and see. Sometimes they're in rebellion and they need to go back, but they may not realize that immediately. But through loving but firm ministry, they may realize, you know what? This church is the same in its belief and doctrine and lifestyle and standards as where I've been. I really need to go back to where I've been. Or sometimes the person is in the wrong, but they find a place of repentance, and then you can help them. Sometimes there are legitimate reasons. There are personality issues, there are family issues, marriage issues. There can be all kinds of issues. Distance and commuting and expense can all play a legitimate role. Family, friends, job situations can all play a role. We cannot prejudge that. We don't want to be so harsh or definite in our judgment that we may cause harm to a soul. You can't build your church on transfers, or if you try, you're going to set yourself up for great trouble down the road. I also believe that God does not honor that. But there are cases in which a church has gone away from truth, or other circumstances where it is possible to incorporate or restore people in such a way that they can be saved and they can be a blessing to the church if handled wisely down the road. Now, what if you find yourself in the position of the pastor who's sending someone, whether with your consent or really not with your consent? What do you do when people want to leave? First of all, you should give advice based on what is best for their spiritual life. Encourage them not to run from their problems, and encourage them to make consecrations. But don't try to appeal to them on the basis of what the church needs. If they express concerns about the church, try to consider them as objectively as possible, because sometimes they, even if they have the wrong attitude, they can identify some things that really need your attention. So you should be willing to address problems as needed. Even if the person leaves, you've got to think carefully, are there problems that I need to address? If they insist on leaving, don't fight them, don't threaten them, but respect their power of choice. Even the Lord himself gave Adam and Eve a choice in the Garden of Eden. If you try to retain them against their will, you'll likely create an even greater problem. But if you hold them lightly, many times they'll reconsider and they won't leave, or down the road, they may reconsider and come back, and will feel the liberty to do so. So as much as possible, let them leave on good terms and leave the door open for return. Don't force a fight. And then communicate with the new pastor with the goal of helping him and helping them. Even if you feel they have left for the wrong reason, treat him with the courtesy of assuming the best. And I will say this, even if you believe another pastor is not being ethical, you must follow what is ethical yourself. Have your own guidelines and your own rules according to what I've expressed, and you follow those. You can't be responsible for what another person does, but you can be accountable to God. And in the long run, I assure you, and I can speak from observation and personal experience, God will bless you if you follow ethical guidelines, no matter what. I'd like to add something to our discussion about ministerial ethics. In the UPCI manual, there is a position paper called My Code of Ethics. It was published by the General Conference in 1964. So I'd like to read it and make a few comments. It says it's not laws to govern, but principles to guide. So it's not intended to be a legalistic thing, but it's intended to state principles that we should keep in mind at all times. Striving to be a good minister of the Lord Jesus Christ, I will constantly prepare myself in body, mind, and spirit. And that statement helps us to understand that ethics really, first of all, deals with our own relationship with God and our personal preparation and stewardship for ministry. I will constantly prepare myself in body, mind, and spirit. I will safeguard the good name of the ministry. I will speak the truth in love, live honestly, and avoid embarrassing debts. And this speaks of our relationship to the community. We should always present ourselves as ambassadors of Jesus Christ. Certainly we should be known for honesty and integrity, but at the same time for love, kindness, courtesy, tact. We should be known as people who keep our word, who pay our bills, and if there's any situation where we can't keep our word or can't pay our bills on time, we communicate properly, promptly, and with appropriate explanations and offer to make things right in whatever way that we can. I will hold as sacred all confidences shared with me. This speaks of our relationship to our own people, our saints or parishioners, or those who confide in us, whether from our local congregation or perhaps other ministers, ministerial colleagues, or people that we're leading in ministry. If we have certain positions or roles that involve a leadership of other ministers. And we must keep those confidences. It's wrong to break a confidence. Even with regard to my own wife, I will tell her the general nature of the problems I'm dealing with, but if there is a specific issue of a very personal nature, I will not presume that I can tell her, but I will ask the person, is it okay if I share this with my wife so that she can know what's going on and she can help us pray and she can perhaps provide guidance as well. And particularly in the case of marriage counseling or perhaps a woman who's coming to us for counseling, then I'll ask to involve my wife. But I don't presume that. I'm communicating to the people that we treat what you say in confidence as a sacred trust. And I'm not going to allude to it from the pulpit, even indirectly. I'm not going to discuss it with another person, even another counselor or my own wife, without your knowledge and consent, and so forth. Again, I may discuss things of a general nature with staff or assistant pastor or a wife as appropriate, but I will make sure to keep confidence. And in preaching, even when we don't name someone, if we allude to the situation in such a way that the person themselves would know you're talking about them, that creates unease, because then they wonder, is it possible that someone else may guess who is being talked about, or they themselves will know the pastor is using this vehicle to say something to me or something about me. So that is strictly off limits. I will exercise the authority of a spiritual leader rather than that of a dictator. I will seek to minister rather than to be ministered unto, placing service above salary and personal recognition, and the unity and welfare of the church above my own personal welfare. We've mentioned some of these principles and we'll talk about them more, but the essence of ministry is to be a servant, to be an example, to be a leader but not a dictator, to respect people's right to choose even when we disagree with their choice, not to manipulate, not to use spiritual authority to force people to do something, but simply being a pastor, a shepherd, or a leader under the pastor who extends the pastoral ministry. I will seek to lead my church to accept its full responsibility for community and world service. So there's a focus on world evangelization, but also a focus on being a good citizen in the community and seeking to better our community and be a participant in our community, to meet not only the spiritual needs, but the physical needs of people that we come in contact with and that we're able to help. I will seek to build my church without discrediting other churches, soliciting members therefrom, or casting reflection on other ministers. And we discussed that, but it's very important that whether directly, indirectly, whether by implication or express statement, we don't solicit from other churches, we don't tear down other churches, we don't try to build our church at the expense of harming another church. I will not compete with another minister for a call to a pastorate in an unethical manner. We really need to trust the will of God. We shouldn't try to manipulate or maneuver our way into a position. We respect the process of selecting a pastor, which includes, first of all, under our congregational form of government, The local church membership ultimately decides who is to be the pastor. We also have a system whereby the district superintendent or the presbyter, as designated by him, supervises this process. The leaders should not try to manipulate and maneuver to get their own favorite candidate in, but they should ensure a fair, objective process. They do have the right and responsibility to screen potential candidates to make sure they're qualified and that they meet the needs or fit the congregation. But ultimately, they need to treat everyone fairly and without favoritism, and they need to respect the wishes of the congregation. Those who are seeking to become a pastor likewise should respect the process, should respect the district leadership, should respect the local church's leadership, and not use so-called spiritual tactics to tell people it's the will of God. They need to decide it's the will of God without pressure from someone who's allegedly using spiritual gifts and so on. If we really believe that God is in charge of the process, then we can allow him to direct the process. And even if we ourselves, there's much to be said about planning for a successor instead of just leaving it to chance. But in that case, we still need to respect the local church leadership and the congregation. We shouldn't try to force a succession plan upon them or force a candidate of our choice, particularly our own relative, but we should allow an objective process to go forward to make sure that whoever we desire to be our successor does have the anointing and blessing of God for that position and the approval of the people. And we see that in the scripture as well. I will, with my resignation, sever my pastoral relations with my former parishioners, will not make pastoral contacts in the field of another pastor without his knowledge and consent. If we have been in a position, there are times when there are ongoing friendships or casual relationships or seeing or meeting someone in the future, but we must be very careful not to interfere with another minister's sphere of authority. And so we should no longer act as a pastor. We should sever any kind of pastoral relationships and even personal or relationships, friendship. We cannot totally eliminate relations of family and friends, nor do we desire to do that, but we must be very careful not to allow church matters to intrude and not to interfere with pastoral matters. And sometimes that may mean severing even casual contexts or contacts in other circumstances might not be a problem, depending on the circumstances. And when there are ongoing contacts that are appropriate, at least the pastor should be aware of that relationship, and we should work in harmony with the new pastor. I will not accept the pastorate of a United Pentecostal Church unless I'm in accord with the Articles of Faith and Constitution of the General Church Body. Having accepted a pastorate, I will not use my influence to alienate the church or any portion thereof from the fellowship or support of the United Pentecostal Church. If my convictions change, I will be honorable enough to withdraw. When we become a licensed UPCI minister, we state that we agree with the doctrine, the Articles of Faith, and that we agree to follow the Constitution. If we will not do that or cannot do that conscientiously, then we need to resign. If we accept a pastorate of a church that is in fellowship with the UPCI, whether by affiliation or by virtue of its previous pastor being UPCI, then we are accepting that church on the basis of UPCI doctrine and policy and procedure. If our intention is to change that, that's not ethical. We shouldn't accept that. Then, if our convictions change where we no longer agree with the doctrine of the UPCI, we cannot in good conscience affirm the Articles of Faith, we should resign that church. We should not try to take that church out of the UPCI or run off the people that want to be UPCI until we get a majority that wants to follow us, but we should withdraw. Even where we've started a church under UPCI approval, and we might say, well, that's the church that I started. Yes, but people will refer to you because of your UPCI identity. Very few churches have no significant input from other UPCI churches, whether finances over the years or people moving to the area, people refer to them, people paying tithes into the church because of its UPCI doctrine and identity. And so if we no longer believe what the UPCI stands for, the ethical thing to do is to resign the church and go start another church or take another church that reflects our values, whether Baptist or Assemblies of God or charismatic or non-denominational or whatever it might be. Obviously, many times that doesn't happen. That lets us know that even when the person is claiming to be growing in grace or having new revelation, that there's a problem. If they cannot be ethical in that, then certainly that casts doubt upon the idea that God is leading them in that direction. And that can be something that in a kind and appropriate way we can point out to those who are questioning, why is this church going a different direction? Why is this pastor changing his teaching? And the answer could be, well, it doesn't seem to be an intensive process whereby a person has set aside a year of prayer and fasting, Bible study, counseling with elders, leaders to see what the UPCI believes, why it believes it, and taking the best arguments or the best reasons and trying to analyze them, examine them, and prayerfully consider them. That doesn't seem to be what's going on, because if that's what's going on, they would be highly ethical. If God is leading them in greater truth or leading them to go a different direction, it would seem that they would be the most attentive to being ethically proper and correct. And so when you don't see people acting in ethical ways in this regard, then while we don't try to judge them personally about what's going on in their heart, we can say at least it doesn't seem to be the kind of example we should follow. It doesn't seem to be the kind of thing that God is in control of the process. It seems to be something personal that's going on. When we take a look at it from an ethical perspective, there is a right way to do everything. There's a right way to go a different direction. There's also a right way to address problems and needs within the UPCI. But in all cases, not only should we be right in what we believe and what we stand for, but we should be right in the manner in which we stand for truth and the manner in which we lead people. While it's noble to want to grow a church, our goal is good, but we must be ethical in the way that we do it. While we may have a desire to help people, hurting people, people who've come to us because of various problems or other situations, that intention is noble, but still the manner in which we help people must also be ethical. This is a big subject, but if we will be ethical in our conduct, follow certain guidelines, we'll have the blessing of God upon our ministry.